Thank you all for coming today. I'm going to just give you a brief introduction about how the webinar will go down today, and then Sandra Hoffberg will introduce the Plant Postdocs organization to you. Today we're really excited to have an exceptional panel to share their expertise on science writing, editing, and reviewing. And this is actually our first non-job market focused webinar as a group of Plant Postdocs. But if you are one of our regular attendees and like those career webinars, don't worry, we'll be back next month with another career panel. So I'm Allison Barnes. I am a postdoc at North Carolina State University, studying plant lipid biochemistry and highland adaptation with Ruben Regan Alvarez. And I'm also the vice chair of Plant Postdocs. So today we'll just briefly go over the structure of the webinar. So it's about a 60-minute webinar. And so for all of our participants, you will be in the listener seat for the first 20 minutes or so. I'm going to give each of our panelists 5 to 6 minutes to explain their personal experiences with scientific writing, editing, reviewing, or any combination of the three. The second half is then designed for our participants to ask questions and interact with our speakers. So any questions, comments, or inquiries regarding the writing process, maybe like, what does one need to know when they're going to review a paper for the first time? Or what are the most common mistakes that editors see when people submit their manuscripts? So we'll be happy to take your questions, and I will screen those and try to group common questions together so that we can cover as many topics as possible. So we will ask you to please submit your questions through the Q&A box. Just due to the sheer number of participants today, that's how we will have to run things. If there is a question about your question, or you'd like to interact with the speaker and clarify some things, you can use the raise hand function and we will unmute you. Let's see, I think that's everything on my list. But before I introduce today's speaker, Sandra Hoffberg will introduce the Plant Postdocs group and our recent endeavors.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Hoffberg, and I'm a postdoc in the lab of Darren Eaton at Columbia University, studying phylogenetics and hybridization in the genus Amaranthus. I'm the secretary of Plant Postdocs and want to take a few minutes to introduce our group and the activities we are doing. Plant Postdocs started with the conversation between postdocs when they realized that every postdoc position is temporary and we are constantly on the lookout for a more permanent job. Arif and Sunil created a community for postdocs in the plant sciences so we can discuss, explore, and support each other as we prepare for our future career path in academia or industry. Plant Postdocs is a 1.5 years old, and we have a leadership team consisting of the chair, Arif Ashraf, the vice chair, Allison Barnes, and the secretary, myself. We have a faculty advisory board consisting of Erin Sparks, Gabriella Auhe, Rob Last, Arjun Krishnan, and Sunil Kanchantmane Raju. I'll briefly mention some of our key activities through Plant Postdocs. We have a Slack group to chat about job opportunities, the application process, interviews, and currently we have more than 300 active Slack members. We have an official website and Twitter account as a source of information on job ads. Recently, we have crossed 3,700 followers on our official Twitter account. We've started an editable Google spreadsheet job board with current jobs and their status, leveraging information from our members throughout the world and through social media. We've created 3PRD, a list of over 150 early career researchers that want experience peer reviewing manuscripts. This list has been sent to editors of over 100 plant journals. And if you're not on this list, but you want to be, there'll be another chance in a few months. We hold monthly seminars where 2 postdocs can share their research in a 20-minute talk. Our next seminar will be on March 30th at noon Eastern Time. Join us to hear a talk about heat stress in maize and the evolution of photosynthesis. This is our 5th webinar, today focusing on science writing, editing, and reviewing. We organize 2 webinars each semester, and they're all recorded and available on our YouTube channel. We're planning other activities and resources, and if you would like to get involved to help plan anything, please reach out to someone on the leadership team. For information on how to join this group, please visit plantpostdocs.com. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Now Allison will introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Sandra. So we're really excited to have this exceptional group of panelists today coming to us from all different sort of areas of science writing, editing, and reviewing. So we have Tom Buckley from the University of California, Davis, who's the chief editor of AOB Plants. We have Nancy Hofmann, who's a science editor for the Plant Cell and the co-founder of Plant Editors and Paradox Scientific. We have Neelima Sinha, who is a monitoring editor at Plant Physiology and a distinguished professor in plant biology at UC Davis, and Vijaya Batthula, who is an assistant feature editor at the Plant Cell and a Fleming postdoctoral fellow at Cornell University. So we'll start with Tom. I'll just time 5 minutes or so and give you a little wave as you're running out of time, and then go down the list. And if you can just tell us about your journey with science writing and editing, and we'll start there.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing my screen.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to participate in this. I hope I've got something useful to say. I'm not sure. Probably something that most postdocs and just junior scientists in general can relate to is sort of imposter syndrome. And the good news is that never goes away, even when you're 20 years down the road. So that's good news and bad news. The good news part of it is that it's not a weakness that you have, it's just the nature of things. And it's probably a sign that you're adequately humble about your own opinions and work and so forth. I think one of the things that can bring imposter syndrome or just a general sense of, negativity about your own work to the fore is when you get reviews back on a paper. That the feeling that you get when you get reviews and they're not all glowing positive, that also doesn't really change. It's always uncomfortable and often sort of painful. There's some things we can do to help mitigate that. Number one, you can help sort of change the nature of reviewing when you act as a reviewer yourself, and just try to have some empathy and humanity when you write reviews, and imagine how it would feel to get that review yourself. If you get reviews that are highly negative, what I found is most useful for me is to immediately write the response that I want to give, full of swearing and terrible things, and then set it aside and come back a week later and delete that and start working on the actual response. So I sort of went off on a tangent about reviewing. So my own history with all of this. I guess I've been doing science in some sense or another for about 29 years. When I started as an undergraduate, I was involved in writing and editing, not science writing and editing, but writing and editing before that, because in high school for 5 years, I was involved in journalism and ended up as a production editor on our high school newspaper. So I've always sort of felt like writing and editing was somehow part of my work identity. I've been reviewing papers for a little over 20 years, and I've been editor in one flavor or another for maybe 15 years. So it's a little hard to sort of distill all of that experience. I guess I'm not really sure where to go from there. So I guess I started getting review requests near the end of my PhD, start of my postdoc period. And they've just sort of built up since then over time. What I found, so I've actually kept all of my old reviews, largely just to keep track of the number and get a sense of where I'm getting requests from and so on. And when I look back at my old reviews, I find that those are the kinds of reviews that if I got them now would make me very angry. And so I think I hope that I've learned to be more reasonable and sort of human in my reviews. The editing side of things it sort of took me by surprise. I wasn't actually seeking responsibility as an editor. Back in 2006, I guess, near the end of my time as a postdoc, I got a role as a communicating editor for the journal Tree, Structure, and Function, sort of an associate editor, the same sort of thing, decision editor. And I did that for a few years, but eventually gave it up because when I started on the tenure track, I was in a primarily teaching role, and it just took up too much of my time. And my tenure committee told me that it was a bad idea to continue doing that. So I set it aside. And a couple of years ago, my current department chair invited everyone in our department to apply for this role as chief editor of AOB Plants. And I thought, why not apply for it? There's no way I'll get it. But at least I might get some interesting feedback out of the experience. And somehow I ended up with the role. And so I was sort of surprised by it. But a nice thing about that is that I didn't come into that with sort of preconception of myself as an editor that that would sort of constrain the way I approached it. And I think I had maybe a really open perspective on what to do with that role. So I think that's helpful. That sort of an open perspective is helpful, a little bit less constraining. Did you put your hand up, Allison, to get me to
I
finish?
did, yep.
Oh.
So is there anything else that you wanted to wrap up with, or?
No, not at the moment. I'll just take questions when we get to that point.
Okay, that sounds great. And so next we'll move to Nancy.
Okay. I thought I would start with just a sort of describing my career path, since there's not necessarily an obvious one going to where I have ended up. So I majored in biology as an undergraduate at Swarthmore College, where I was actually also a writing associate, which was a peer writing tutor, which is pretty heavily involved there. In all your introductory classes, you would submit your first draft to a writing associate, and then have a conference with them, and then submit the final one. So that editing process is pretty built into the undergraduate experience. And in retrospect, that was probably the start of my editing experience, but I wasn't paying attention to that then. So after undergrad, I worked for a couple of years in a lab at the University of Pennsylvania, studying hexokinase in mouse sperm, and then went to UC Davis for my PhD, where I was just down the hall from Neelima. Actually, I was in Steve Fegg's lab and studied chloroplast protein targeting. My PhD project was setting up MOS as a system in which to do biochemical and genetic experiments. Then a couple years after I finished my PhD, I started editing first for the Plant Cell as a science editor, where we edit post-acceptance papers and also write the little blurbs, the little in brief articles highlighting papers in the issue. And then after doing that for about a year or so, and I actually still do that, so I'm still in that role, but then also started a company with a couple of the other science editors, where first as plant editors and then Peridot Scientific Communications, where we work specifically in the area of plant cell and molecular biology, but editing for authors, getting their papers ready for submission. And then we also work with journals post-acceptance. So mostly society journals, because they're the ones who are investing in curating the literature. So this is a step often in between peer review and copy editing, into production of proofs and stuff. It's the science editing step where we make sure that well, that the instructions for authors are followed in terms of the scientific opinions, so things that are on the editorial board. If people have ideas about how you should talk about orthologs versus paralogs, or controls versus regulate, or even, so those are just sort of terminology, but also whether you can rename your genes, whether if you do this technique, you've done the right controls. So we delve into the science more than a copy editor would, and we try to make sure that the message is clear. So for several journals, actually, we do this post-acceptance science editing step. We have a team of people who do that. So we now have editors throughout the world and clients throughout the world, and we're really working on that level of the science. We also help write some of the materials to promote conferences for mostly, again, for societies. So we think of ourselves as kits for PIs. Basically, there's things PIs could do, and we can take some of those things off their desk. We can help with the writing. Again, we focus on communicating to a scientific audience, that we differentiate that from what you would call science communication, which we think of as being to a general audience, a public audience, and we generally keep it within our specific expertise of cellular and molecular biology of plants, although we do have some groups with expertise in other areas that we've developed if someone's asked us to do other things. So I think that's enough about what we do. So we just, spend all day working on editing that way. We can talk about some other things. We actually find a lot of meaning in keeping a different population of people associated with science. So a lot of our editors are women or people who needed, two dual career couples who needed flexibility in terms of where they are. So we have a lot of opinions about that leaky pipeline metaphor. I guess we're all the puddle, but we think of ourselves as keeping people in science and associated with science, and we feel like those people should continue to be in the room when you think of people who are plant biologists. So that's another axe that we can grind. But I wanted to say a few things about writing, and there's lots of tools out there to make your writing good. I really encourage people to focus on efficiency in their writing, whether it's manuscripts, emails, everything you do. That's kind of an elephant in the room of people who are overbooked. Everyone in science is overbooked. So my argument is that if you really look at your process and pay attention to it and try to make sure that you're putting the appropriate amount of effort into any given writing task. So I send typo-riddled emails to my business partners every day, because I know that they know that I know how to spell. And I need to just get the message to them. So I put the action in the header. So that's the other piece. What I was going to say is that I also think that good writing is fine and has its place, but effective writing is what I encourage people to keep in mind. So anything you write is to induce an action on the part of your audience. So if it's a text, it might just be to make them smile or to write back to you. If it's your manuscript, it's to get them to finish reading it, to cite it, anything like that. So have the action in mind, and then put the appropriate amount of effort into it. That's my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. All right, so next we will move to Neelima.
Hi, everyone. So I guess I've been on the block the longest, 30 plus years in science, and I'm, I won't talk about my career path. That's a whole different story, but I am on the plant biology faculty at UC Davis, and I've been editor on several journals throughout my career. So currently, you have Plant Physiology listed, but I'm also specialty chief editor in Frontiers for their Frontiers in Plant Development and Evo-Devo specialty. And so this is a new journal with a newish, I would say, journal with a very different way of doing things. And, at some point, if people want to ask me about that, you can, but they have an interactive peer review system where authors can directly interact with the reviewers and when they're going through the whole revision process. But, I feel very close to that journal because when it started, I helped set up that specialty and, set up the reviewer and editor board and things like that. For plant physiology itself, I am a monitoring editor, but plant physiology also does specific focus issues. And so when they mount a focus issue, they will pull 2 or 3 editors from the board, and those people will be the associate editors for the focus issues. So I'm currently involved in 3 of those, a lot of work, but the good thing is that they are topical and they collect a lot of reviews and primary research articles under one umbrella. So, fewer. So we just are in the process of completing a focus issue on parasitic plants. So if anybody was interested in that topic and they went to that focus issue, they would get the A to Z with the reviews and the research articles. So writing was not difficult for me. So for me, the learning was to help my trainees write. Because for a while, I just couldn't understand why you couldn't just write. But over the years, I've tried to develop, specific techniques that work for different people. And so in the Q&A, if you want to talk about the writing process itself, I'm happy to talk about what, some of the strategies might be. But, as far as reviewing goes, I would agree with Tom that in general, and without casting aspersions on any of you, you've all been trained to be rigorous scientists. But I find as an editor in general that the more stringent and harsh, not cruel, not mean, but stringent and harsh reviews come from the younger reviewers. And I think it's because they have been trained in a couple of ways. We've trained them to do that. Like, when we do journal clubs, I have been thinking about this a lot. When we do journal clubs, we don't say, oh, look, this was cool. We rarely say that. We tear into, well, they didn't really show this, and how could they claim this? So even in the journal club process, we are training our trainees to be critical and sometimes hypercritical. And then, when they themselves are submitting manuscripts, those are the kinds of reviews they're getting back, they're not seeing the kinder, gentler reviews. And so this bleeds into the reviewing process. So I feel like somehow the more senior of us have to make it more clear to the new people that we're bringing into the reviewer fold that, their experience may not be the best experience. And rather than thinking, it wasn't easy for me, think about what was the most hurtful or unproductive about the reviews that you got and try to fix that. So that's what I would say about the whole reviewing process. And then as far as, and then, I have more that I could add on the process of publication, like how do you respond to reviews and things like that. And that's also something that could maybe be in the Q&A section, because as you start to publish and you get reviews, Tom said, of course, write that expletive-filled one and then put it away and tear it up. But then in the end, how do you respond to reviews that actually move your manuscript forward? What's the best way to deal with that? And then as an editor, of course, our job is to sift through this, to look at reviews that may not have picked on the most critical things in the paper. And I think that even as editors, we're not doing a great job of that. I mean, everybody's overcommitted and overwhelmed. And, ideally, an editor should be a reviewer also, but we're not always able to do that. So there is a lot to be done at that end also. I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so we will go to our last panelist. So I can reset my timer here to Vijaya, and you told me you have a few slides to share, so go ahead and share those.
Are you still muted,
Sorry,
Vijaya?
I was muted. Sorry. Sorry, can you hear me now and can you see my slides?
Yep, we're good.
Yeah, okay, great. I think I'm the newest on the block here. So I'm Vijaya. So I did my undergrad, master's and PhD from India. So I'm currently a postdoc at Adrian Rhodes lab at Cornell University and also an assistant feature editor to the Plant Cell. And mostly I'll be talking about the science writing, which I have been started recently, I guess. So to share my experience about science writing. So it all began with writing summaries to the Planter Fellow for Plant Science Research Weekly. So what we do is like we select some of the interesting articles about the plant sciences and write a very short summary to give a flavor to the reader, like whether he's interested, whether he wants to go and read and to make the decision. And I'm also currently assistant feature editor to the Plant Cell. So there I write about, I'm mostly interested in writing the in-briefs. So these in-briefs are larger than the summaries and shorter than the paper. So it gives you a flavor of like, what is the question that the authors are addressing and what are their approaches and what are these broader impacts and conclusions like that. So, and I have also been writing summaries recently to the shared biology. So it's shared biology is an initiative by some of the grad and postdocs where they select some of the interesting papers in biology and try to write a summary so that it can reach not only to the scientific community, but also to the more of like general people who are interested in what's going on, to know what's going on in science. So, so how I started this science writing, it's a story of realization that myself that I'm an introvert. So I used to attend, when I attend the conference, it's very hard for me to start a conversation with any authors and any other people. So I thought like maybe writing could be this one way to reach people and start an easy conversation next time when I see them at some other places. So that's how I think I started this science writing. And I feel like I should have started this way back in my PhD or before that. And some of the reasons that I couldn't do that was like some of the false impressions or conceptions that I had at that time was like, maybe if I dedicate my time to some of these activities, I would delay my PhD. Or also like, if I'm not good at writing, maybe. So these were all things that were like hanging around in my mind and which are still there, but somehow I took a step and started writing and I don't regret it now. So I think I also, and one more thing that I got throughout my science writing is like a lot of help. Especially from Plante, Mary Williams, she was like very helpful and she was helping me in writing and drafting these summaries. And I think it has improved a lot of my writing skills. And also as assistant feature editor at the Plant Cell, we have a lot of help from the editors and many other people, especially Nan Eckard, who reads to all this in briefs and gives you some inputs and positive feedback, like where we can improve and stuff like that. So all of this help was there. So even if you're hesitant, like you're not good at writing, don't hesitate, just start writing. I think that's all from me.
That sounds great. Okay, so we already have several questions in the Q&A box. So we will just go ahead and jump right into that. And I might direct questions at one specific person, or I might just send them out to the group and we'll see who wants to answer them. So the first question that we have, I think could apply to any of you. Certainly, I have been going through this right now. As how do you balance your research activities with editing and writing responsibilities?
Take that. I try to set aside a little time in the morning where I will go through my editing dashboards for the journals that I'm associated with. And and deal with those issues maybe 3 times a week. As far as reviewing goes, that's a different story these days. And as I review papers, those take considerably longer time because you have more primary responsibility there. And I try to work on those, like my process would be to read a paper, write notes in the margin, and just go through one quick read one time, and then go back and reread it with my notes in the margin and start writing a review. And I would say that that's like a 2 to 3 day process, usually being done over the weekend. So yeah, it's a tough one, but maybe other people have other strategies.
So as of me, I think I was always, maybe I would say lucky. I chose always writing summaries or in briefs to the papers that I'm interested in reading. So anyways, I'll end up reading those papers irrespective of whether I'm writing or not. So that selection would help or would save a lot of your time, I guess. And yeah, that's my strategy.
I would echo what Neelima said. My case, I try to set aside. I try to make it be the very first thing that I do in the morning, and just go through and make sure there are no outstanding editorial tasks. And if it's possible to handle them immediately, I do so. With reviewing, it's more or less the same. Not every single day, but I guess I've learned over the years to calibrate how many reviews I accept so that I know I can get them done in an adequate time. I think the most important distinction to me between my research work and my editorial and reviewing work is that with few exceptions, the editorial and reviewing work impacts a lot more people and has a much shorter time frame on it. So it has kind of a temporal priority. I mean, they're both equally important and necessary, but if I have to get one done this week, and then it should be the reviewing or editing work rather than my own research.
I don't obviously still do research, but we have plenty of other stuff going on. And the one thing we encourage our editors and everyone who's looking at sort of the balance, work-life balance and all that stuff is to maintain calendars that include all of those things. So not just a work calendar that you view separate from everything else, but a work calendar. I mean, I keep separate calendars, but make sure you're viewing them all together so that you can see, like, you can take control of it, like Neelima and Tom both said, so that you block out times for the things that you do need to do, and you can see the other things, and that includes some of your outside life things, and make sure that you're prioritizing the things that you mean to prioritize and not accidentally doing things that feel urgent but aren't actually your top priorities. So really look at that important and urgent and important and not urgent, and making sure that those are all there and that you're focusing on important. So it's easy to mess that up.
Great, thanks everyone. So this question I'm just going to direct to Neelima solely because she and I have emailed about this already, but feel free to jump in, anyone else, after we're finished here. But could you comment on the impact of preprints on academic publications? So is it changing the peer review process? Are there drawbacks, or what are your feelings on it, and would you recommend it?
Okay, so I think that, I'll start out by saying I remember a Plant Phys editors meeting where, on Twitter, all the young people wanted preprints, but many journals at that point were saying, if you put something on bioarchives, we will not consider it as a primary submission to us. And I remember fighting that good fight long and hard at Plant Phys for them to accept that preprints were not really prior publication. Some editors there are still pretty hardwired where they hate preprints, but I think Plant Phys itself now gives you the option, once you've submitted, to shoot stuff out to bioarchives. You can do it directly from their dashboard, which is great. But if I were not submitting to Plant Phys, I would either concurrently or maybe even a little before, and I have, always submit to bioarchives. So everything that's been completed and is about to go somewhere or is in the process of submission, I have placed on bioarchives. And I only see an upside to it. I see it as, publicizing your work, making people aware that you're doing this work. I do not see a downside so far. As far as the reviewing process, I have to say that, and maybe Tom can comment on this more. I have to say that it's a little disappointing that the bioarchives for our field, the cell and developmental and molecular biology, and the bioarchives are not really seeing any kind of peer review. It would be so nice if those of us who were doing journal clubs would occasionally just pick a bioarchives paper and then write some comments on the archives, because that's the purpose of the archives. The purpose of the archives is for it to get some kind of public peer review and help you improve your paper. And I think it's happening in other fields. It's just not happening in our field. And I think we are at fault there. So as a community, while more and more people have started putting things into archives, they've not fully embraced the ethos of the bioarchives.
Yeah, that's something that we're sort of trying to help along in our Plant Postdocs group with our new monthly seminar series. So it's only for preprints or recent publications, because we didn't want to inadvertently exclude anyone whose lab doesn't do the whole preprint thing. But as an option when you apply is to give the talk is that you can have 2 people review your preprint, and then we are uploading that to pre-review.
That is
And trying to get that started, because yeah, we totally agree with you. That's something that we're kind of putting our preprints out there, but not a lot of people are necessarily submitting that review after we read someone's preprint.
exactly. And I think it's part of it could be just some sort of hesitancy to put yourself out there on the internet. But again, and this is a more open forum, but again, I think that reviews in an open forum are by nature kinder and gentler. And I think that this will also overall improve our reviewing process. So even if it's just a nice comment and a question on something that you think was left unanswered or you think was not made clear, it would be so fantastic if we just were doing that a little bit more in the archives, because I think it would overall really help the publication process.
I've got something else to add to that, but I think I'll wait until there's another question that comes up relevant to later on.
Okay. That sounds good. So, sorry, I lost the next question I was going to ask. I had it pulled up here, so let me just find it. It was directed to Vijaya. Here we go. Vijaya, could you explain and how you sort of got involved in writing these summary articles in Plant Cell and did your Plante Fellowship, all of that? How can someone who is a postdoc or finishing PhD student find more information and get involved in these sort of initiatives?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there is a lot of information that you can get from social media, I guess. So I began this as a Plante Fellow, so that gave me a confidence, like to write more for example, to the Plant Cell, which I'm doing as an assistant feature editor, which was also published in some of the social media things. And the Plant Physiology also does this writing sort of in briefs. And Mary Williams, she has, I think, promoted it in different ways. And one of the main way was the Twitter. So that's how I think I get to know more information. And it is also like, just because I was a Plante Fellow, I established some of the contact points, like some of the people like Mary Williams and many others now at the Plant Cell also. So if I have a doubt or any interest, I know whom to contact now. So I'll ask them like, okay, is there is any option or any other positions that I can write things for things. So that's how I think I contacted Nancy Ickard, and like, I'm interested in writing this assistant feature editor. And I got that information through Mary Williams because I was a Plante fellow. So having at least few, maintaining those contacts are like very beginning point. So if you don't know where to find the information, you can ask them. And don't hesitate to ask any of the people whom you see as a face of that institute or that general or anything. So try to write an email and express your interest, and many people were like kind, and they'll let you know like what are the further steps to do, or is there is any other options, and they'll also direct you towards any other generals or any other similar platform that you might be interested in. Hope that answers.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question I'm going to direct to Nancy, and it was for a postdoc who's considering a career in the area of communications and or editing. What would you recommend as steps to explore these fields and gain experience?
So we often tell people if they're at writing and editing, those are a little bit different directions. I would say in terms of writing some of the stuff that Vijaya just talked about, but also having a Twitter, you know, science Twitter is really quite active. So if somebody, and that you don't need anyone else's authority to start your own account. So I would say doing things like that that allow you to let people see how you can have a take and participate in the community in a positive way. Probably similarly writing, you know, reviews and stuff, but I would say like getting some writing out there. You could do a blog, or you can do your writing things that way, and then watch for, there are calls, I think usually once a year, for the assistant features editors for both Plant Phys and Plant Cell. So if people are interested in doing those, watch for when they're accepting applications to do that. And then there are groups, the Council of Science Editors is a professional organization that often has job openings out there. I would say in terms of editing, that's a good place to watch. There are a lot of kind of very low paying editing companies out there, but they are ways, and they use freelancers, and that's a way to get your foot in the door and practice your craft and see if editing really is what you want to be doing. It is. A lot of people have written papers in their PhDs, have done a lot of writing and reviewing. Editing is a little different. You're helping someone else craft their message, helping them solidify their thoughts about what they're trying to do. And some people find that really appealing and meaningful, and other people are just frustrated because they wish they were writing their own stuff. So really making sure that that's what you want to do, and you can do it as a, you know, volunteer to do it for your peers. Everybody needs someone to read their paper, so doing that, I would say first practicing that, but then getting in on those places where you can get started for free and get some experience are the way to go. That helps. There's Council of Science Editors, and then there's some other ones, but yeah, professional groups. There's really great groups on Facebook. Editorial, it's like Editors Association of Earth is a good one. Anyway, there's actually a pretty active community of editors out there if people are interested in that.
Awesome, thank you. So this next question I will direct to Tom. So the question says, given the recent agreement of the University of California and the private publishers, what do you see as the future of academic publication, and which model or models do you see as the most effective, sustainable, and accessible to both scientists and the general public?
So I'm a bit of a socialist on this question. I don't think any commercial model is going to be sustainable or at least ideal in the long run. I think we may well be locked into it because that's just the nature of the beast. But I think that a better solution in the long run would be something that goes away from permanent publishing and curation by commercial entities and instead goes towards something that sort of starts from a bioarchive, accumulates reviews and input as described by Neelima, and then allows versions of a manuscript or a paper, or whatever you want to call it, to evolve over time kind of like the way software packages evolve on GitHub. So you would have different versions of a manuscript. Somebody makes a comment and the authors say, oh my goodness, you're right, we should have changed this. Then they go and do an additional analysis or experiment and it updates the paper. I think most of the work that commercial publishers do now, maybe most is not fair, but an awful lot of it is redundant with things that could be at least somewhat automated. And a lot of the actual grunt work is done by the scientists anyway, the editors and reviewers, and of course the writers who are doing the vast majority of the initial work of creating the content in the first place. There are a few journals that are completely non-commercial and don't involve a commercial publisher at all, and all of the work is done by the editorial staff. There's a journal of plant hydraulics run by Hervé Cochard is an example of that. So I think it's feasible to move in a direction where you don't have to have a commercial publishing company doing all this work on the back end. Will that ever happen? It depends on, I mean, it won't happen while I'm around probably, but I think it depends on how much force people who are now in the early stages of their career apply to this. I think the only way to make it happen is just to charge out there and actually create an example of a journal like this and try to marshal effort and interest and submissions from other people in the field so that something like that it builds up and eventually develops status equivalent to a traditional journal.
May I ask Tom a question? I think you guys might be interested in this too.
Sure, go for it.
Tom, where do you see the society journals fitting into this? Because I think that's always been an issue, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the society journals at the moment are, at least theoretically, at least they have the potential to be the most equitable and least wasteful in terms of absorbing money from the system and not actually putting it to good use other than lining the pockets of commercial publishers. They're also probably, because they're not driven by a profit motive and they're primarily academic institutions, they are probably most able to adapt to a new model, whatever it ends up being. So like at the moment, our journal is run by a nonprofit. And I don't think that the model would survive the way that I'm trying to run our journal would survive if our publisher and the entire entity which owned the journal were not a nonprofit and therefore dedicated mainly to science per se as opposed to making money. I can give more pushback to the commercial side of things than I'd be able to in another forum. So I think societies may be the way to drive this in the long run. I mean, the example I gave of coming up with a GitHub-like plant journal, certainly if an organization like ASPB or the New Phytologist Trust or other analogous organizations were to launch that themselves and put all of their considerable value in the community, people respect them, they're well known. But to put that behind a journal like that, then it would have a vastly greater chance of succeeding.
Okay, I think we have time for a few more questions. So I'm going to ask this one that was sent, that's not in the Q&A box, it was sent to me. What are some of the initiatives in journals that you all are aware of to help early career researchers get trained in reviewing or editorial responsibilities?
So I'll make a start, but I'm sure Nancy and Tom have thoughts on this. Many journals are now saying, if you would like to invite somebody from your lab to co-edit with you, let us know, and then we will give you both credit. Although what this credit is in the world of anonymous reviews, I don't know. That's a whole different, that could take several panels to get past that anonymous review bit. I personally like to invite postdocs to review, but I think that, what I said at the start about being really harsh and hypercritical is something that that has to be kept in mind. And so I'm not so sure that at least the journals I'm associated with are saying, oh, this is a postdoc review. Let me mentor this person and make sure they, realize that some of these comments are not really suitable. So I think we could use some more training, but maybe Nancy can.
I would say that the assistant features editors in both Plant Phys and Plant Cell are explicitly aimed at training younger people to be board members, editorial board members. So those two programs were designed in order to help people learn to both review and evaluate manuscripts. So not just do the peer review, submit your review, but also be part of those discussions behind the scenes about integrating the reviews together. So those are both certainly explicit ones. I know those journals and some of the other ones we're associated with. This is maybe sort of the next step, but they have flags that authors can choose to enter when they submit a paper if they consider themselves early career, and if they might like a little bit more guidance through the process. So that stays with their manuscript throughout the peer review and the processing. So we see it at the end, you see it throughout. So that's another way to kind of help, I think, broaden the club in terms of who gets into journals. So I think at least, again, like I said, I tend to be involved with society journals because they are the ones, rather than getting rid of an extra editing cost, they're adding them. But I would say I'm seeing some pretty specific initiatives aimed at both increasing equity of who gets there, but also helping to explicitly train early career people.
Okay, so then I will move on to our last question, which hopefully you all can answer and give your little bits of feedback for. We have several. I'm just sort of lumping this into one big question. There were a lot of questions about how can I write more efficiently? How can I write better? Right? How can I improve as a writer? So maybe give me like one or two of all of your top things that help for us as earlier career researchers to help improve.
I'll go first and just say a couple of things, and that is start with an outline. That's the most important part. Like, what is the question that this paper is going to address? Have a clear outline, and then bite-sized pieces. Just like Tom and I mentioned that, we sit down in the morning and deal with our editorial stuff, maybe set aside even 15 or 20 minutes each day and write a few lines. They don't have to be perfect. Like Nancy said, the emails don't have to, the initial writing does not have to be perfect. And this is something that I'm going to put out there for you when you become PIs. You will often be dealing with people who English is not their first language, and to put on them the burden of writing perfect English as they try to write their paper. I learned very early on, I had a student who was fantastic, and I told him, bullet points. Just tell me in bullet points. Doesn't have to be full sentences. Doesn't have to be perfect English. We need a framework. And then the writing process can be plastered onto that framework. So I'll let other people speak.
My comments? So I completely agree with Neelima about writing outlines if you can. I think another thing is to view the process of writing a paper as being integral with the process of doing the science. So I try to write as much of a paper as I can and at least outline it. And again, it doesn't matter how good the language is. Write some kind of a framework, scaffold of the paper before you even do most of the work. Because in the process of doing so, there are certain things that will occur to you, like you're writing up the methods and then the analysis, and it'll occur to you, oh my goodness, if I want to do this analysis, I'm actually going to have to make this other measurement, or I'm going to have to make this measurement in a different way, and so forth. It just helps you keep kind of a bigger picture of the project or the study in your head. So don't see it as a linear thing. It's more like this continuously iterative kind of snowball rolling down the hill, gathering mass and substance as you go. And if you approach it that way, then by the time you're done with the study, you've already basically written the paper, and all you have to do is go in and fill in the actual results and clean it up. And it makes the process much less daunting. And therefore, any single part of it, including perfecting the language itself and making it impactful and sufficiently brief, is also less daunting.
So what my strategy is like, I'm also a non-native English speaker. So I read a paper and I try to understand what was the motive or problem with which the authors have started. And I also try to understand like what are the approaches that they have used to understand that problem or to explain the interest that they are looking into. And I also understand at the end what was the conclusion after I read the paper. How did it enhanced my understanding of what I know already? So after reading, I do all of these things in my mind, and then I write in, as Neelima said, in bullet forms. Like it's not a perfect English. There'll be a lot of mistakes in them, but I just write them whatever I understood very broadly without seeing the paper or anything else. And then I come back to that not on the same day, after the next day, and then I see like I have written some nonsense there. All the words doesn't match. That sentence is not complete. So it gets to my mind like, oh, this sentence is wrong here. So maybe I try to adjust, frame it in a different way, and also try to connect all those sentences. That connection is, I think, somewhat most difficult thing that I find personally. But when you have enough understanding of the paper, you would be able to connect them, not in the first go, but at least as you keep writing day by day. Or I'm not saying like spend hours and hours of time, but just a few minutes would be sufficient. And coming back to your yesterday's writing and just going through your writing will tell you at least one mistake that you have done in your previous writing. So it's a step-by-step process, I would feel.
Okay, I'll go quickly since I know we're getting close to the end. But what I would say is you can see from all three people that everyone has strategies. All of them have strategies. They're all effective writers. So I would say some advice I would give is to be gentle with yourself, and you don't have to force yourself to use someone else's strategy. So I am a write without fear, edit without mercy type, like a lot of them are describing, like just get it down. I finally realized after 20 years of marriage that my husband is not. He has to have a perfect sentence before he can get to the next sentence, or he is just wasting a ton of time. So paying attention to what it looks like when it goes well for you and what it doesn't, where you're wasting time, and manipulating yourself basically to make it efficient is what I would recommend. So for myself, if I'm waffling about should I delete this or leave it or blah, I just turn on track changes and hide them all. And so then I know it's there and I can delete it happily and move on, and I never go back and put it back in, but I got rid of the time wasting wondering about it. So I would just say, pay attention to your process the way all of them have, and use whatever works for you. You don't have to use someone else's process. Go, Neelima.
I just wanted to say one thing which I forgot to mention as far as the reviewing process goes, and that is, I want each of you, when you are reviewing, to sit down and make a list of the journals that you would consider sending your paper to. Let's say you had the perfect paper, and where would you send it? Is there a priority, right? Would you send it here and then here and then here? And think about that prioritization. And it is because different journals have different levels of acceptance. Nobody wants you to make false statements, but significance, how much data, how big. And when you review, keep that in mind. You cannot review a plant phys paper as though it was submitted to developmental cell. Okay? Because that is an unproductive strategy for the authors when they get this review back. So that's something that's the most important thing as a reviewer that you need to think about.
That's great advice. Thank you. So yeah, so that wraps up today's webinar. We didn't have time to get to all of the questions. There were a lot of great ones in the Q&A. So something that we've encouraged in our past webinars is that we can take this conversation over to Twitter. And if your question was not answered today, you can tweet it at us and we will try to retweet that out to our community and continue the discussions over there. But thank you everyone for attending. And we hope that we'll see you at our next webinar.
Thank you all for doing this.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thank you.
Yeah.